Good morning everyone, my name is Michelle. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another video. It is Thursday morning, the 4th of April, and it's with a very heavy heart that I make this video today. It's the kind of details that you never want to hear happen to a child. But Seth Rogers, Sebastian Rogers' biological father, shared some heartbreaking, very raw details in his latest interview. This is with someone called Justin's on TikTok, who is a local who's been helping Seth, and the interview was just utterly soul-destroying. Some of those details we've never heard before, and I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about the new Nancy Grace podcast with Seth Rogers and other guests. I don't think the whole episode is out on YouTube yet. I have seen some clips, but maybe by the time I post this video, maybe it will be on YouTube. But if not, then you can hear it on any podcast provider. I listen to my podcasts on Apple, but you don't have to. Lots of other podcast providers. All right, so I'm going to discuss both of those things. And of course, this will be day 2 of the extensive, exhaustive law enforcement search. Lots of workers drafted in yesterday to recanvass, no stone left unturned, of the neighbourhoods around Sebastian's home. So I will be live later over on my other channel, Michelle Walks, if there are any new updates. I might go live anyway, even if there's nothing kind of breaking. So if you're new to this channel and you don't know that I've got a second channel, go and check out Michelle Walks. Go and subscribe over there, get your notifications on, because if you're enjoying this channel, you'll also enjoy that one. So with all that said, let's go. Let's start with the Nancy Grace episode, and she is gunning, absolutely gunning for Chris Proudfoot because he's lied to her. She perceives it as an affront. She's not happy. She had a guest on who pointed out some of Chris Proudfoot's lies. Are inconsistencies. We don't know what's a lie and what's true. We don't know which version of what Chris has been saying, particularly in the later interviews. I mean, in the first set of interviews that he did, like on Duchess's channel and then with the news, it was all sweetness and light. You know, they had a great family, they got on well, and everything was hunky-dory, and they could not understand at all why Sebastian would run away. Okay, there's that. But the mask has certainly slipped. And that doesn't mean that they're guilty. It doesn't mean that Chris Proudfoot or Katie Proudfoot are guilty of Sebastian's disappearance. But certainly it tells us things weren't right in that home. So even if Chris Proudfoot was exactly where he said he was, in an RV park in Mississippi, just over the border, because he works in Memphis, if he genuinely was there the whole time, and it can be proven that he was there the whole time, then it's not him, is it? It's not him that's responsible for Sebastian's disappearance. I've never thought Katie Proudfoot was directly related to Sebastian's disappearance. If he did run away, though, what was going on in that home perhaps explains it. Seth Rogers said that he had no idea what had went on in Chris's life before he was with Katie. You know, the details that Nina shared, Chris's ex-wife, one of his many ex-wives. She's his 4th wife, Katie being his 5th wife. But he did know that Sebastian, when he spent his time with Seth, didn't want to go back home, but couldn't explain why. Now, that may be because of his autism or his chromosomal deletion syndrome. He couldn't find the words to describe why. Maybe he thought he'd be in trouble if he said why, but he didn't want to go home. He didn't want to go back home. It's just so sad that he was going to go and live with Seth, his dad, full time when school was out for the summer. And then Katie and Chris would just have him every other weekend. So it's a very, very sad situation. But Nancy Grace is trying to unearth the truth of Chris Proudfoot. I'm not a Nancy Grace fan. I don't normally watch Nancy Grace, but yeah, I've been enjoying her coverage of this case. Do you remember when Chris and Katie Proudfoot were on Nancy Grace and she talked about the polygraphs and she said, "Have you taken a polygraph, Chris?" And he said, "No, the TBI told me I didn't need one because they knew where I was." And she said, "Well, if I set one up, will you do it?" And he said, "Name the time, name the place," or words to that effect. Well, Nancy now tells us that she did go through all the hoops to set a polygraph up with a respected polygrapher. And guess what? Chris wouldn't do it. He said the TBI didn't want him to appear on Nancy Grace anymore. And it was because of the TBI that he couldn't do this polygraph. I don't believe that for a second. I don't think Nancy does either. So, interesting podcast. Go and listen to it if you've got a minute. Now, let's turn to the most heartbreaking and raw interview that I've seen Seth Rogers do. And this is with someone called Justin's on TikTok. And he shared a detail about Sebastian's earlier life that was just dreadful. Listen to this. The link to the full interview, please go and watch it, is in the description box.
There was an incident in California before Chris and Katie came back here. There was another CPS incident in California at her house. Katie and Chris let a child into their house that was 5 years older than my son. My son was 7 or 8 at the time, and this kid was 13. And she has a habit of not checking on her kid. I would never let some kid that's 5 years older than my son play with my son anyways. It's like, why do you want to play with my son? There's a 5-year difference. That's a pretty big difference. You're 13, and my son, you're a teenager. My son is not a teenager. He's still playing with Hot Wheels and Legos, and he's building things. He's playing video games, and you're a teenager. You go out and you have your own, age appropriate group that you play with, and they were letting this kid play with my son, and they weren't checking on him. And then this kid took my son's innocence, and he molested him.
So you take your time.
And there was nothing I could do in California because the kid was 13. But they let that happen. And they didn't bother to try to even get my son help until last year. Here, my son has just turned 15 in December. It means he's been dealing with an emotional, stressful, traumatic incident for the last 7 years. And I've been trying to help him. I've been trying to get him help. Going to talk to his doctor and telling them what happened. And for the doctor to tell me, she was like, I knew none of this stuff. And I'm like, really? Because he's supposed to be seeing a therapist for this. And she's like, well, he's not seeing the right type of therapist for this type of trauma. I care about my son. And actions speak so much louder than words. And there's just no justification for the actions that I have seen from them. They're not parents. They're not parents at all. And I want to know what happened to my son.
So it appears that Katie and Chris aren't the helicopter parents that perhaps they led us to believe initially. Not helicopter parents. They were letting an older child play with Sebastian, not checking on him. And remember, Sebastian was only young, very young at this time. Child concerned was 13. Sebastian was 8. And in Seth's words, took Sebastian's innocence. We don't need to explain what that means. And Sebastian is traumatized, but hasn't had the appropriate therapy to help him through this. Well, perhaps this is a better explanation of Sebastian's negative behaviours that Chris and Katie have been dealing with than his autism. Or maybe it's a an equal contributor. Look, in my previous life as a psychologist, the effects of SA on males was one of my specialties. So these are males who were assaulted as children or males who were assaulted as adults. I've spoken to many survivors. In a child, it has a lasting effect. It can lead to a whole host of behaviour problems, mental health problems, physical health problems even, as an adult. But what is the biggest protective factor against severe trauma following a child who has been SA'd into adulthood? What is one of the biggest protective factors? Appropriate psychological support. I did a study back in 2005 of 40 men who had been SA'd, and about half of that sample had attempted to take their own life some point after the assault. And the biggest predictor of attempted taking one's own life was not having adequate psychological support. It can literally be a matter of life and death. I swear down that is my own research. I swear to you, that's my own research. Back in 2005, very little was being written about males who'd been SA'd, sadly. I was one of the pioneers of this research, and it breaks my heart to hear that happened to Sebastian and that he wasn't given adequate psychological support. When he comes home, I'm absolutely positive that Seth will give him the therapy that he needs, the support that he needs going forward. We just have to find him. Just have to find him. So I will be live later. If there's any breaking news, I'll be live like that, like a shot. But otherwise, I'll come live and do a review of the day. All right. So until later, that'll be on Michelle Walks. I'll see you soon. Bye for now, guys.